Hello, my lovely friends. It's Emma from A Vintage Girl in a Modern World. Every now and then, a television programme comes along that never really leaves us. No matter how many years pass, no matter how much television changes, it somehow still feels just as magical as the very first time we watched it. And for me, Bewitched has always been one of those programmes. Whenever I hear that familiar theme tune, I instantly smile. It's one of those shows I can put on after a long day, make myself a lovely cup of tea, and simply relax. And of course, Bewitched is remembered for its magic, for Samantha twitching her nose, for spells that rarely went to plan, and the wonderfully chaotic situations that always seem to follow. But I've always felt the real magic of Bewitched goes much deeper than that. It's the warmth, the humour, the beautiful family home, the unforgettable characters, and the cosy feeling that somehow makes everything feel a little bit brighter for half an hour. And I think that's why people are still discovering Bewitched today. Not simply because it's funny, but because it makes you feel good. And in a world that sometimes can feel very busy and very noisy, there's something incredibly comforting about stepping into Samantha and Darrin's world for a little while. Now, this isn't going to be an episode about every storyline or every season. Instead, I simply want to spend a little time talking about why I still love Bewitched, why it's never lost its charm, and why all these years later it still feels like a little bit of television magic. So make yourselves comfortable, grab a lovely cup of tea, and let's spend a little time together revisiting one of television's most enchanting classics, Bewitched. Of course, one of the biggest reasons Bewitched has remained so loved is Samantha Stephens herself. I honestly can't imagine anyone else playing the role quite like Elizabeth Montgomery, because there's something so naturally warm about her. She has a kindness that seemed to shine through in every episode. Even when Samantha found herself in the most extraordinary situations, she always remained calm, caring, and wonderfully patient. And I've always loved that about her. She never used magic to make herself seem more important. In fact, most of the time she was trying not to use it at all. She simply wanted to live an ordinary life with the man she loved. And I think that's one of the reasons that makes Samantha such a timeless character. Because beneath all the magic, she was actually incredibly relatable. She wanted a happy home, a loving marriage, good friends, and a peaceful life. The magic was simply the fun that surrounded it. And I've always admired the relationship between Samantha and Darrin too. And like every couple, they had their disagreements. Life rarely went according to plan, especially when Endora appeared. But underneath all the misunderstandings and magical mishaps, there was a genuine love and respect between them that always shone through. And then of course there was Endora. Oh my goodness, she has to be one of my favourite television characters of all time. Every time she swept into a scene, you just knew something was going to happen. She was dramatic, quick-witted, completely unapologetic, and absolutely hilarious. And as much as she loved Samantha, she never missed an opportunity to remind Darrin exactly what she thought of it. And the chemistry between the cast was simply wonderful. Nothing ever felt forced. You genuinely believed they were a family. And perhaps that's why these characters stayed with us for so many years, because they weren't simply characters in a sitcom. They felt like the people you were happy to spend time with. And every time I watch Bewitched, it feels like I'm catching up with all old friends all over again. Now, I have to admit, one of the things I probably admire just as much as the characters is the Stephens house. Because, oh my goodness, I absolutely love it. If someone handed me the keys tomorrow, I don't think I'd hesitate for a second. It's one of those television homes that instantly feels warm and welcoming. The cosy living room, the beautiful staircase, the elegant furniture, the lamps, the pictures on the walls. Every room feels lived in, comfortable, and full of character. And if you've been watching this channel for a little while, you already know what I'm like. I always seem to find myself looking beyond the story. I'm admiring the wallpaper, the curtains, the ornaments, the little finishing touches that make a house a home. Sometimes I think I'm looking around the room just as much as I'm watching the episode. And I've always loved homes from this era. There was just such a warmth to them. They felt inviting. Somewhere families and friends gathered together, where conversations happened around the dining table, where neighbours dropped by for a coffee, and where laughter filled the rooms. And perhaps that's one of the reasons Bewitched has always felt so comforting to me. It isn't simply the magic, it's the world that it creates. A world that's cosy, friendly, and wonderfully familiar. And every time I watch an episode, I find myself wishing I could spend an afternoon in that beautiful house, just sitting there in the living room with a cup of tea, while Samantha and Darrin tried to navigate yet another magical disaster. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons I've never fallen out of love with Bewitched. Because it isn't simply somewhere I enjoy visiting. It's somewhere I genuinely love to live. The more I thought about Bewitched when putting this episode together, the more I realised it's about so much more than magic. Yes, the spells are fun. Yes, Samantha twitching her nose still makes me smile. And yes, Endora never fails to bring a little chaos wherever she goes. But beneath all that is a programme with an enormous heart. Because at its core, Bewitched is really about love. It's about family, it's about friendship, and it's about trying to make everyday life work, even when everything seems determined to go wonderfully wrong. And I think that's one of the reasons it still feels so special today. The magic may have drawn people in, but it was the characters who made them stale. Because you genuinely care about them. You wanted Samantha and Darrin to work things out. You couldn't wait to see what Endora would do next. And every time Uncle Arthur appeared, you just knew you was in for a good laugh. They felt like the people you'd happily spend an evening with. And I've always loved that Bewitched never relied on being loud or over the top. Your humour feels gentle. The stories are full of warmth. And even after the most magical misunderstandings, everything somehow goes back to what it really matters. The people who love one another. And I honestly think that's why so many of these classic sitcoms have stood the test of time. Because they remind us that family isn't perfect. Life isn't perfect. Relationships aren't perfect. But that's okay. Because underneath all the little disagreements and unexpected moments, there's usually a great deal of love. And perhaps that's the real magic of Bewitched. Not the spells, not the broomsticks, not even Samantha's famous nose twitch. The real magic is the kindness, warmth, and love that runs through every single episode. And I honestly don't think that kind of magic will ever go out of style. Sometimes people assume that programmes like Bewitched are simply nostalgic, that we watch them because they remind us of another time. And while nostalgia is certainly part of it, I don't think that's the whole story. For me, Bewitched feels like home. It's one of those rare programmes I can put on after a long day and immediately feel myself relaxing. The familiar theme tune begins. Samantha appears with that warm smile. The Stephens house comes into view. And before I know it, I've forgotten about everything that was on my mind. And I think we all have programmes like that. The ones we reach for when life feels a little overwhelming. Not because we need excitement, but because we need comfort. And as I've often said on this channel, I don't believe the past was perfect. No generation ever is. But there was a gentleness to so many of those classic television programmes that still speaks to me today. They weren't trying to shock us, or keep us on the edge of our seats every 5 minutes. They simply told good stories about the people we cared about. And sometimes, I think that's exactly what we need. And the older that I've become, the more I found myself appreciating programmes that leave me feeling happier than when I first pressed play. And Bewitched has always done that. Every single time. It reminds me to slow down, to smile more, and to appreciate the little moments. And to perhaps find a little bit of magic in ordinary everyday life. And I honestly think that's why Bewitched continues to find new audiences, even after all these years. Because although the special effects may belong to another era, the warmth, the kindness, the humour, and the comfort it brings are completely timeless. The more I thought about Bewitched when putting this episode together, the more I realised it represents so much more than a classic television sitcom. It represents comfort, it represents family, it represents laughter, and perhaps most of all, it represents the simple joy of escaping into a world that never fails to make you smile. And whenever I spend time with Samantha, Darrin, Endora, and the rest of the characters, I'm reminded why I've always loved classic television so much. Not because I believe the past was perfect, no era ever is, but because programmes like Bewitched remind us that kindness, love and laughter never go out of fashion. And in a world that often feels incredibly busy, it's lovely to know that we can sit down with a cup of tea, press play, and spend half an hour with characters that feel like old friends. And perhaps that's the real magic of Bewitched. It isn't Samantha twitching her nose. It isn't the smells. It isn't the magic trips. It's the way the programme continues to make generation after generation feel welcome, to make us laugh, to bring us comfort, and to remind us that sometimes the happiest moments are found in the simplest of places. And I honestly don't think that's something we'll ever outgrow. So thank you for spending a little time with me today. I'd love to know in the comments if you're a fan of Bewitched, and if you are, who your favourite character is. Is it Samantha, Darrin, Endora, or perhaps someone else entirely? I'd love to hear your memories and favourite moments. And as always, thank you so much for watching, for your kindness and being part of this little vintage community we've created together. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep a little old-fashioned magic in your heart. I'll see you all again very soon.